There's a person in your life right now who does not like you very much. Maybe you know who it is. Maybe you just feel it, that slight coolness in how they speak to you, the way they never quite look at you directly, the sense that something between you is off and you cannot figure out why. Here's what every instinct you have will tell you to do about it. Be nicer. Do more for them. Show them you mean well. Buy them something. Help them with something. Prove through your actions that you are worth liking. And here's why that will make things worse. What I am about to tell you goes against everything you think you know about how relationships work. It is one of the most counterintuitive findings in the history of social psychology. It was documented over 200 years ago by one of the most strategically intelligent men who ever lived. And almost nobody uses it because almost nobody believes it until they see it work. The finding is this: if you want someone to like you, do not do them a favor. Ask them to do one for you. That is it. That is the whole thing. And it works in a way that will make you rethink every difficult relationship you have ever tried to repair. But before we get into why, we need to go to Pennsylvania in the 1730s, because this story starts with Benjamin Franklin and a man who genuinely could not stand him. Benjamin Franklin was, by almost any measure, one of the most accomplished humans in recorded history. Founding father, diplomat, inventor, writer, the man who pulled lightning out of the sky with a kite and a key. But in the early years of his political career in the Pennsylvania legislature, there was a rival, a fellow legislator, influential, well-connected, and openly hostile to Franklin in a way that was becoming a real problem. Franklin needed this man's support, or at least his neutrality. Trying to win him over directly had not worked. Charm had not worked. Public gestures had not worked. So Franklin tried something that made no logical sense on the surface. He sent the man a letter asking to borrow a book. Not money, not a political favor, a book. A rare book from the man's personal library. And the man, perhaps surprised, perhaps flattered, sent it over. Franklin kept it for a week, returned it with a gracious note of thanks, and the next time the two men met in the legislature, something had shifted. The rival spoke to Franklin warmly. Over the following months, the hostility dissolved entirely. The two men became friends and remained so for the rest of their lives. Franklin wrote about this in his autobiography. He described it simply as having engaged the man's goodwill. But what he had actually done, without knowing the psychological terminology for it, was trigger one of the most powerful and least understood mechanisms in the human mind. We now call it the Benjamin Franklin effect. Here is what was happening inside that rival's head. Before the book request, his feelings toward Franklin were negative, and his behavior matched those feelings perfectly. He disliked Franklin. He acted accordingly. Everything was consistent. The brain likes consistency. It finds a kind of comfort in the alignment between what we feel and what we do. But then he did Franklin a favor. And now there was a problem. Because doing someone a favor is an act of kindness. And you do not do acts of kindness for people you dislike. So the brain is suddenly holding two contradictory things at once. I dislike this man. I just helped this man. These two things cannot both be true. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs, or a belief and an action that do not match. And the brain's solution to that discomfort is not to undo the action. The action is already done. The brain's solution is to change the belief. So it does. Quietly, beneath the level of conscious awareness, the rival's brain reached a conclusion. I helped Franklin. I would not help someone I disliked. Therefore, I must not dislike Franklin as much as I thought. And somewhere in that quiet internal revision, the hostility started to dissolve. Franklin did not change the man's mind by arguing. He did not change it by being more likable or more impressive. He changed it by giving the man's brain a problem it could only solve by liking him more. This was first studied formally by psychologists Jecker and Landy in 1969. They set up an experiment where participants won money in a competition. After the competition, some participants were approached by the researcher and asked if they could return the money, as it had come from the researcher's personal funds and they were running low. Other participants were not asked anything. At the end of the study, all participants were asked how much they liked the researcher, The participants who had returned the money, who had done the researcher a favor, rated him significantly more favorably than those who had not. They had given something up, and their brains had made sense of that sacrifice by deciding the person was worth it. This is not an accident of the study design. It has been replicated across decades of research in social psychology, and it maps onto something fundamental about how human beings construct their own self-image. We all carry a story about who we are. Most of us, most of the time, believe we are reasonable people, fair people, people who are not unkind without cause. So when we do something kind, even something as small as lending a book or returning a favor, our brain files that action as evidence for our own identity. I am the kind of person who helps people I respect. Therefore, I must respect this person. The favor does not just change how we feel about the other person, it changes how we feel about ourselves in relation to them. And that is far harder to undo. Now here is where it gets interesting, because the reverse is also true, and the reverse is darker. When we harm someone, when we treat someone badly, when we are unkind or dismissive or cruel, our brain faces the same consistency problem in the opposite direction. I am a reasonable person. I just treated this person badly. These two things cannot both be true. And again, the action is done. So the brain changes the belief. It decides that the person deserved it, that they are not worth better treatment, that there was a reason. It finds the reason or invents one. And the more we harm someone, the more our brain convinces us they deserve harm, until we have built an entire internal case against a person who may have done nothing to deserve it, simply because our mind needed to justify what we did to them. This is why people who bully others often end up despising them. This is why people who cheat on partners often come to resent those partners. This is why harm escalates. Every act of cruelty is followed by a mental revision that makes the next act of cruelty easier to justify. We do not hate people and then hurt them. We hurt them and then hate them. Franklin's insight, even if he could not have stated it in these terms, was that this mechanism runs in both directions, and that means it can be deliberately engaged. So how do you actually use this? The first thing to understand is that the request has to be small. The favor has to be something the other person can actually do without significant cost. Franklin did not ask his rival for a political endorsement. He asked for a book. The favor needs to be easy enough that the person will say yes, because the entire mechanism depends on them doing it. If they say no, nothing changes. If they say yes, the revision begins. The second thing is that the favor should feel genuine. You are not manipulating someone into liking you by creating an artificial situation. You are giving their brain an honest opportunity to revise an assumption that may itself have been unfair or based on incomplete information. Most of the time when people dislike us, it is not because of something we actually did. It is because of an impression, a misread, a moment that landed wrong. The Franklin effect does not manufacture affection out of nothing. It removes a barrier that should not have been there. The third thing, and this is the one most people miss, is that reciprocity is not the goal. You are not asking for a favor so they will feel obligated to you. Obligation creates resentment, not affection. You are asking for a favor so that their own mind, working quietly in the background, begins to construct a version of you that is worth helping. The difference between those two things is everything. There are people in your life right now who have a fixed idea of who you are. Maybe that idea is not accurate. Maybe something happened early on and the impression stuck. Maybe you remind them of someone. Maybe they decided, without meaning to, before they really knew you, that you were not for them. You cannot argue your way out of that. You cannot perform your way out of it. You cannot be impressive enough or charming enough or generous enough, because every impressive thing you do, they will filter through the lens they already have. But you can hand them a book. You can ask for something small, something they can do, something that costs them almost nothing. And you can watch, over the following weeks, as their brain quietly solves the problem you gave it. Benjamin Franklin understood something that most people never figure out, that the most powerful thing you can do to change how someone sees you is to give them a reason, a real, behavioral, undeniable reason to revise the story they have already written. He did not ask to be liked. He created the conditions under which being liked was the only conclusion that made sense. That is not manipulation. That is an understanding of how minds actually work. And now you have it too. I'll see you in the next video.